cult of corporate excess and greed who preached to a large flock of devout followers about how to get along in investing and in life. A Renaissance man, Munger modeled himself after none other than Benjamin Franklin. He studied mathematics, physics, meteorology, and engineering, all before attending Harvard Law School. He trained himself in subjects as diverse as psychology and architecture. Munger passed away at the age of 99, just 1 month shy of his 100th birthday and 2 weeks after our last interview with him. Tonight, we bring you a look back at the wit and wisdom of Charlie Munger.
Certainly a peculiar example of one life. It's interesting that a man who started out to be a lawyer ended up with an identity that's more like a guru's than a lawyer's.
I called you a lawyer once, and I think that was the most irritated you've ever been with me, because that was how you started things, but you really have studied every field out there and tried to...
Yeah, sure.
...to take things from different studies and different models in life. Did you go about doing that intentionally?
Of course. I could see the power of it.
When did you figure it out?
Well, it came naturally to me. And I was what I would call naturally arrogant. And it wasn't that good a mind. You know, I was in the top 1%, but no prodigy. So I never would have succeeded in a field that required a mind to be that of a prodigy. But it was a much better mind than ordinary people had. And I recognized that quite early, and I just played the hand I was dealt in order to get as much advantage as I could.
When did you recognize that? Were you a child
Very
still?
young.
Yeah.
When I was taking courses in grade school, I was often revising the textbook and the course in my head to make it more correct because I realized the professor was doing it wrong.
What kind of things would you recognize that they were doing wrong?
They had some crazy idea. For instance, my Latin teacher was a maladjusted woman who was a devout follower of Sigmund Freud. And I recognized that Sigmund Freud was a horse's ass when I still first read him when I was in high school. And, of course, it was an odd little boy whose Latin teacher is teaching him Freud. But she was peculiar, and so was I. And, of course, when I bought the complete writings of Sigmund Freud from the American Library. It was one big book, and I went through it very laboriously, and I realized he was a goddamn lunatic. and so I decided I wasn't going to learn that from my Latin teacher. I had some very unusual teachers. The best teacher I had in my life was Lon Fuller, but he was the best contracts teacher in any law school. And contracts is the best subject in every law school. At least I think it is, because it integrates so beautifully with the new doctrine of economics that came along with Adam Smith and all those people.
You had this idea of mental models before you got to him, though.
Yes, and I just naturally came to it. But it was very much a Lon Fuller-esque thing. I was just awestruck by Lon Fuller. I have never been awestruck by any other teacher in my whole life, including some gifted mathematicians and physicists who did some remarkable things. But Fuller really he really changed my life. He almost made me a law professor. I considered being a law professor. But then I knew I'd be pretty good at it.
Let's talk about Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah.
He's one of the framers of our nation. He very famously gave out
And he was a prodigy.
And he was a prodigy, and he trained himself in lots of different disciplines.
Well, and he self-trained himself with like 2 years of grade school education. This is a very remarkable thing. And when he found late in life that he needed something like algebra, he went back and pulled down the textbook and taught himself algebra.
How old were you?
He was very much a self-educated man. And that was a very much an interesting story for that reason. How could a man who taught himself everything How could a man like that go into so many different fields and be the top guy in the whole country? And weren't we lucky to have him?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's when you started modeling yourself after some of the
I
things?
don't know when I started modeling myself after Franklin, but I certainly tried to model myself a little. I like the mixture of financial life and regular life.
Mm-hmm. You started out in college at the University of Michigan.
Yes.
You were young when you went there because you had skipped some time in grade school. And you went for mathematics. Why'd you choose mathematics?
Because I could get an A in it without doing any work. That's why I took mathematics.
You did that for a couple of years.
Yes.
And then World War II interrupted
Yes.
things. You were 17 still when
Then
Pearl
I
Harbor
decided
happened.
that geology was not the proper science to handle any war. And that obviously I had to start with physics. So I took physics.
And then you focused on...
No, I didn't have to take it very much because as soon as I'd mastered the first part of physics, I actually entered the Air Corps as a private.
Right.
And marched around in some field in the middle of winter and slept in a tent.
So, Charlie, you were born on the first day of 1924. You have seen a century of history. And I wonder, do you ever stop?
Not only that, I lived in the aftermath of a previous century of history. In fact, you can argue that about 90% of the progress of man has happened in civilization, has occurred in the last 2 centuries. And that I lived in the immediate aftermath of one. In that century, we figured out so very, very much that was quite important as a start. If you stop to think about the technical revolution, it happened in that century. That's when they opened all these coal mines and created all these steam engines. And of course, that's what brought the economic system up. So man had enough leisure, had enough time to think when he wasn't just getting enough food to eat. So it was an amazing time to be born. And to be born in the place in that century where all the growth was going to occur.
And then you come along, and 1924...
I'm in the immediate after that. My father grew up in a world where if you wanted to go around Lincoln, Nebraska, he had to use a horse and buggy. There was no car. There was no broadcasting. It was a very different world.
And what's happened over the last 100 years has been pretty remarkable, too.
Yes, then the 100 years I've lived has been even more remarkable. That's pretty much all of modern biology, modern medicine, and modern industrial civilization, modern chemistry. Just imagine what the world would be like. We had photographs for 100 years before we had modern chemistry. But no, it was done by a guy who was a natural, very good chemist. And he created a mighty company, a great growth stock and so forth. And it finally wiped out the shareholders in bankruptcy.
Eastman Kodak.
Yes, Eastman Kodak. Yeah. Which is an amazing story that could happen. And of course, it helped me because if somebody as brilliant as old Eastman and somebody who hired as many brilliant people as old Eastman did could take the company into bankruptcy, I figured that lesser people could easily take big companies into bankruptcy eventually, in spite of their best efforts.
What's the lesson you took out?
Well, it was going to be very difficult to be excellent enough at anything to make any money. That's the lesson I took out of it.
Part of the advice that you give people in life is pretty basic stuff, but if you follow it, it's really excellent advice. I think your first one is have low expectations. The second one is have a good sense of humor. And the third one is surround yourself with the love of friends and family, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
I have a hard time thinking of a time when you set your expectations low, though.
Yeah, well, I did.
How so?
Well, let me give you an example. Here I am, little boy growing up in Omaha, and my father, one of my father's best friends living 2 blocks away, And he has two sons, and I'm right in the middle of the age of his two sons. And Eddie Davis Jr. is sort of a mechanical genius. He can take anything apart quickly and put it right together and perfectly. And he also reads books all the time, and that's probably all he ever does is sit around reading books. He's a very bookish little genius with vast mechanical ability. And Eddie Davis Sr., his father, was the son of the leading mathematics professor at the University of Nebraska. And he didn't have any money. In those days, he had a huge family. He could do anything. He saw things in 3 dimensions. And it was quite obvious that anything required mechanical ability, I would not be as good as the two Davises. You know, I just, no amount of effort or work was ever going to do it, make me into a fly caster like Dr. Davis was or anything else. I just didn't have that kind of ability. And so I decided to stay the hell out of businesses where I would compete with people like Eddie Davis Jr. and Eddie Davis Sr. in their strong suit.
Knowing your competencies.
Knowing your circle of competency, right? Yeah. And that kept me away from those businesses, totally. But I'm not all that pleased. I could have done a lot better if I'd been a little smarter, a little quicker.
What are you talking about? Like, yeah. You've had success in everything you've done in life. What would you like to do differently?
I might have had multiple trillions instead of multiple billions.
Do you sit around thinking about this? What would you have done differently?
Yes, I think a lot about what I nearly missed by being just not quite smart enough or hardworking enough.
Coming up.
Avoid.
What would you have changed if you could go back?
I would be the richest man on earth.
Well, what did you miss? What was there? Something where you zigged where you could have
started earlier, for one thing, and I would have compounded longer, and I would have compounded better.
So saved even more.
And of course, I would have ended up richer. I was going to live to be 100 years old, and I constantly am aware of the facts that I basically screwed up. Given the hand I dealt, I could have done a lot better. Quite easily done a lot better.
But you are not somebody who spends a lot of money on yourself. We're sitting here in a beautiful house, but this is a house that you lived in for 70 years.
I know.
You could have moved and spent more.
Warren's lived in his house for about 60 years.
Yeah.
We're similar. But you see, we're both smart enough to have watched our friends who got rich build these really fancy houses. And I would say in practically every case, they make the person less happy, not happier.
How so?
Having a basic house really helps you. Having a really fancy house that's good for entertaining 100 people at once is a very expensive thing to do, and doesn't do you that much good.
I think one of the things you've said along the years, at least this is what I've been told, is that it's not staying rich that's difficult, it's staying sane.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, that's a lot of your life. A lot of your life and advice is
avoiding traps.
Invert, and try and figure out where you don't want to be.
Yes, and then avoid it. Yes, of course. That's what everybody's life is, with any sense. All the people I know, and my friends now, they never would have become alcoholics. It was too dangerous. They don't get near it if it takes that many fine people into deep trouble. And I noticed as I got older and older that all the people that had very early heart trouble, the males that had very early heart trouble, had one thing in common. They all smoked a lot of cigarettes. So I could see that coming fairly early. And it's rather interesting. I tried to learn to smoke so I could be a cool kid like the other kids in high school. I tried to ruin my life, but it nauseated me. And so I said, the hell with this. People have lured me into a goddamn thing. You got to get nauseated by learning to do it. And I said, I'm not interested enough in going through a lot of nausea that I want to smoke, so I just didn't smoke.
Now, you did drink from time to time, right?
Yeah, sure, but I didn't. Again, I was, and I even drank to excess a few times, but I was always, there were enough alcoholics and near alcoholics in my own family to make me worry about liquor. And so I was always very cautious about drinking liquor. Now, I did occasionally get drunk and throw up, That gave me the nausea, which enabled me to give up liquor.
Everybody wants to know what's the secret. What is the secret for you? What did you conscientiously go
I don't know the secret. I avoided the standard ways of failing because my game in life was always to avoid all standard ways of failing. You teach me the wrong way to play poker and I will avoid it. You teach me the wrong way to do something else, I will avoid it. And of course I've avoided a lot because I'm so cautious.
But you do things you like you'll eat peanut brittle or
yes, doesn't matter that much.
Okay.
I drink Diet Coke.
Yeah.
I'm sure Diet Coke shortens my life a little. But I don't give a damn if the last week of lying there unconscious goes away. It's only the good part of life I want anyway. And Diet Coke may be helping me skip who knows? It's helping me skip the last month, not the first month.
If other people want to know what the best way to live is, you would just tell them, avoid the crazy things, avoid the things that take you down.
Yes. Avoid crazy at all costs. Crazy is way more common than you think. It's easy to slip into crazy. Just avoid it, avoid it, avoid it.
I think another thing you've said is whatever you are, wealth and age will make you more so.
Yeah, sure.
Up next.
I did not anticipate when Warren and I carried more money than all the other little boys. When I used to shoot agates in the schoolyard to make money playing competitive agates.
Marbles?
I made sure, marbles, but agates were the most valuable marble. And I never wanted to lose my good, valuable collection. Some guy was more coordinated than I was at shooting marbles. So I would never play for stakes unless I could play better than the other boy.
That's kind of been a habit you've made throughout life. You don't play poker with someone you're going to lose with.
Exactly.
Right.
I didn't always arrange the circumstances. I just fell into them very frequently. But I got to play with competitors who were dumbcoffs.
People who weren't assessing the odds quite the same way?
No. They weren't assessing the odds the way it was easy to assess the odds. If you learned, if you paid attention when the teacher was teaching you permutations and combinations. A
lot of what you do, though, also is picking your shots. I mean, I think you call it sit on your ass investing.
Yeah,
where
sure.
you wait for the big fat pitches to come in. You don't do a lot over time.
That's correct.
So you think it's harder to make money now?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and it's a very important question. And of course it's harder. It's so much harder you can't believe it. The people that have found it harder are the people that made Warren so rich. Ben Graham and his colleague Dodd in a damned adjunct course at Columbia. What Ben Graham did that was so interesting is that he taught that you should find a few good things and stay with them for a very long time. But a long time to him was a few years. It wasn't a few decades. And he did that for like 40 or 50 years in a little investment partnership with incentives and so on. And his investors, who were by and large not very rich, did very well with him. After he got his share, they got a good cut that was higher than what other people got after fees. So he delivered a valuable product. It could be a lousy business, but they were cheap enough. They're still all right if they had enough assets per share. Right. So you're getting at least twice as many assets as you were paying for. Yeah. And he just floated around for the best available stuff among companies, good and bad. Yeah. That was his system. And he had worked for 50 years. His clients had good returns. Well, after he became so famous, partly with the help of Warren Buffett and Warren Buffett's success, everybody tried to do the same thing. And of course, as everybody crowded in, trying to be a little Ben Graham, it got more and more competitive. And that's what's happened now. And the low-hanging fruit that Ben Graham had a lot of because of the Great Depression has gone away. And if you just try and float from one undervalued bad business into another and pay all the costs and so forth, it just doesn't work well enough for the people that actually put up the money to be worth bothering with. That's the way it works now. But in Graham's time, it was the best way there was.
Well, your upgrade on that was to just look for good businesses.
I saw immediately the grammar was wrong.
Right, and you look
Yeah,
for...
you had, the real money was in the really great companies,
Right.
which carried you up and up and up and up and up. Just so many hundreds of billions in Berkshire. I did not anticipate when Warren and I were starting with our little piddly start that we'd ever get to 100 billion, much less several hundred billion. It was an amazing occurrence.
What happened that you didn't anticipate? What led to that success?
Well, we got a little less crazy than most people, and a little less stupid than most people, and that really helped us. Then in addition, we were given this much longer time to run than most people because something kept us alive into our 90s. And it gave us a long track from our little fiddling start all the way to the 90s. Those are the two things that really happened. And of course, we wised up over time. We got into better and better companies, and we understood more and more of the bad things that could happen to you and how easy they could creep in. And we avoided them even more assiduously when we were old than we did when we were young. And it all worked.
I think back in 2015, for the 50th anniversary of Berkshire, you wrote in the shareholders' letter, you had a $60 billion pile of cash at that point. You thought that that pile of cash would decline over time because you'd be able to buy more and more things. Now you've got almost $160 billion in cash. Is there an opportunity for a really big purchase with that? And do you think you'll see one?
Well, of course, there's an opportunity for a purchase a lot bigger that people can make who don't have us 160. We have $160 billion in cash, plus a great credit rating we deserve. And who in the hell has that? Not very many. But what it's going to be, I can't tell you, because it doesn't matter how good it is. We're of a size now, or too small just doesn't move the needle very much. So we need something big to come along and use up all our cash and some borrowing. But who's more likely to find something than a guy who has $160 billion in cash, plus a long history of buying bargains? I don't think it's hopeless. It may have to be done by some different people. You know that the next time we may not be able just to squeeze a little more lemon juice out of the old lemons. We may be able to, we may have to squeeze some new lemons, meaning new people may have to make the decisions. But who can make them better than somebody that has watched the early process all through all those years and seen how well it works, and who starts with a little legacy of $160 billion of cash?
So you're talking about Greg Abel, Ajit Jain.
Yes,
Ted and Todd.
Or somebody not yet identified. Yeah. The main trick that Berkshire shows is the power of what I call the Wooden effect. And Wooden was the most famous basketball coach of the whole era. And you figure out what the hell he really did, which, of course, somebody like Warren and me, we just automatically do it. He concentrated about 90% of the playing time in 7 players, and everybody else was just a sparring partner for the people. And that turned out a great system for winning at basketball because you identified your best player and concentrated so much of the playing time on your best player, and more playing creates better. So he concentrated all his playing time on his best players. Simple idea. That's what Berkshire did.
You talked about some of the joy you found with some of the investments Berkshire's made along the way. I think Washington Post was a great one.
Who doesn't like to happily enjoy extreme success accumulated with people who extremely admire? That's what Warren and I have gotten to do. Well, of course, that's a lot of fun. What was interesting about Berkshire's history is what turned the first $300 million of Berkshire net worth into the first $3 billion of Berkshire net worth.
What was it?
And it was blue chip, stamps, and See's Candy, and the Buffalo News newspaper, and the early insurance operations. under Ajit Jain when he came to us. And so it just, everything worked at once. And we made these unholy profits out of these fiddling businesses that weren't that good. And it was a very remarkable thing. And there was some luck involved.
Warren has said that his worst trade ever was buying Berkshire Hathaway itself, the mills.
Yeah, sure.
What was your worst trade?
Well, my worst trade was buying a block for the Munger family in Alibaba, which is a pretty good company, but I think it got overhyped. And Jack Ma made mistakes in dealing with the Chinese government. I had some everybody has some bad ones. Yeah. You have an off day. The greatest tennis player goes out there someday to the center court and has a bad day. It happens.
I think people learn more from their mistakes sometimes than
and their bad days even. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
But what really is knowing you can have a very bad day. Do not live your life in such a fashion that a bad day can kill you.
Mm-hmm. Which means what when it comes to investing? Making sure you don't use leverage?
Well, they aim for the fences. It's like a hitter at baseball who tries to hit a home run on every pitch. Yeah. The great home hitters do not remotely swing at every pitch. They wait for one that they can really handle. And that's what great stock pickers do, too.
Still ahead. Charlie, let's talk a little bit about bureaucracies, because you have duly noted the problems with bureaucracies, whether it be a big company, whether it be the government.
Have I ever?
Right. So how would you fix some of the bloated bureaucracies out there? Let's start with the federal government.
That comes in my too hard pile. I can't tell you how to do that. That would be really hard, because you got the problem of A, figuring it out, and B, getting it done. And to solve both those problems are really, it's like picking the high pick on Everest and saying, I'll waltz up there in a day, you know. You aren't going to waltz up there. It takes several days to do.
There was a presidential candidate who recently said that his solution for that would just be to fire everybody in the federal government. His Social Security number ends with an odd number. Does that sound like a good way to fix it?
No. It does not. It's too arbitrary. It may be that you need some bigger fix than that. And it may be you're never going to get it, too. It may be that it's just something like old age that we're never going to get rid of.
But you are still a believer in the need for a government.
Of course. If you get right down to it, what I am is a lover of the progress of civilization. That turns me on. Oddly enough, the man whose name I bear, my father's father and my father's mother, both thought exactly the same way. And the great moral book, they took me to church. But when they really wanted to teach me something which turned them on, it was the legend of Robinson Crusoe, created by Daniel Defoe. And of course, it was good for me. And of course, I never got over it. I'm still following Robinson Crusoe's method of going at life. That's what I did. I imitated Robinson Crusoe. Then I was lucky with my ancestors on the other side of the family. I am very good at learning things from dead people. That's what everybody should learn. And so I had one grandfather on the other side whose life never overlapped mine. But Grandfather Ingham just talked endlessly about the end of days. Now he's surmounted all these hardships. And he says, it looks pretty easy looking back at retrospect, but it was damn hard, I want you to know. And he said, as in reviewing my life, what you grandchildren have to realize, it was his version of Robinson Crusoe. He taught every grandchild, is when they give you a real opportunity, the world's not going to do it very often. And you're only going to get 3 or 4 of these invitations to the pie counter. Mm-hmm. And when you get your invitation, for God's sakes, don't take a small helping. he basically said, lever up when you're sure you're right. And of course, that's good advice. But be sure you're right is what makes it hard. How can you be sure you're right?
Yeah.
Well, but you can't, that's the point. You can't do it very often, just a few times in a lifetime. Even if you're a Grandpa Hingham or Warren Buffett, you only get a few trips to the pie counter. If you take out of Warren Buffett's life the 10 most important trips to the pie counter, the whole record would look like dung. We knew enough to take a good helping when we were over the trip to the pie counter. Now, we did take way smaller a helping than we could have easily handled. Berkshire could easily be worth twice what it is now, and the extra risk we would have taken would have been practically nothing. All we had to do was use a little more leverage that was easily available.
In hindsight, you're glad you didn't? Just from the potential risk?
It's an interesting example. The reason we didn't is the idea of disappointing a lot of people who had trusted us when we were young under a thing that left us, if we lost 3/4 of our money, we were still very rich.
Right.
That wasn't true of every shareholder. Losing 3/4 of the money would have been a big letdown. So we were very cautious in dealing with our shareholders' money. If Warren and I had owned Berkshire without any shareholders that we knew, we would have made more. We would have used more leverage.
Charlie, Warren Buffett has said that he could fix the budget deficit problem in Washington by simply saying that any member of Congress couldn't be eligible for re-election if the national deficit was more than 3% of the GDP.
Well, yes, that kind of thing has been done in some places that have gotten enough trouble. And it has worked. It isn't that it can't physically be done. He's certainly right about that. It can be done. Whether it will be done, neither Warren Buffett or I can tell you.
But is that the proper situation? It's just setting up the right incentives?
Well, we may come to a place where we simply have to, where we mismanage to the place where it's obviously we have to go back to something that's more like Adam Smith. And just take the inequality instead of the poverty. I like inequality a lot better than I like poverty.
I mean, is this modern monetary theory that's gotten out of control at this point, do you worry?
Of course, modern monetary theory was that a level of indebtedness, which in the past would have happened only during a war, can now be routinely created to avoid any kind of unpleasantness from some families getting squeezed by hardship at the very bottom of the economic order. I'm not sure the whole damn system works when some families aren't being squeezed at the bottom of the economic order. That may be our path to civilization, and maybe the only one we've got. In that case, we just have to be financially responsible whether it feels good or not, even whether it works well or not on a temporary basis. And maybe we just have to do it.
In thinking about age, a lot of companies are getting rid of mandatory retirement ages. Boards are getting rid of a lot of the mandatory retirements. But there are questions right now about whether Joe Biden or Donald Trump are too old to be president at 81 and 77 years old.
Well, it may be true that everyone in America is too old to be president. It may be just too hard a job the way things have worked out. Maybe it's just a hand too tough to play. Maybe you're not going to be allowed to play it out. We don't know.
You mean the age factor, or?
No, I'm talking about the atomic war factor.
The atomic war, just the idea of being president at all.
Yeah, yeah. If you've got a big ruin smoking country, it's not much fun being president.
So that is something that really, you can say you set it aside and it's not worth worrying about, but.
I don't spend much time on it because I can't fix it.
Right.
It goes into my too hard pile. Even if I had all the power, I couldn't fix it.
Up next.
If you soldier through, you can get through almost anything. Yeah, but not like Warren. More than half the Munger money has already been passed to the descendants. So I've made exactly the opposite. It was a smaller amount of money, but I made exactly the opposite decision for the majority of our money. The majority of his money he gave away. And now he didn't exactly give it away. If it goes to Buffett foundations to go on for another 100 years,
Is there anything left on your bucket list, anything you'd like to do?
Well, that's an interesting question. I am so old and weak compared to what I was when I was 96 that I no longer want to catch a 200-pound tuna. It's just too goddamn much work. To get it in takes too much physical strength. So I don't know why I would have paid any amount to catch a 200-pound tuna when I was younger and never caught one. And now if given the opportunity, I would just decline going. I won't even go out after them. There are things you give up with time.
You're pretty active. You've got a busy social schedule. You're on Zoom. You have breakfasts and lunch.
Well, I like it that way.
Yeah.
That's my idea of a proper old age for me. And I didn't plan it. It just happened. And when it happened, I welcomed it. I am very good at recognizing unfair advantages. And I got unfair advantages in old age the way I got unfair advantages in non-old age. And when they came, I just grabbed them. Boom, boom, boom. The one grab I never made was for a third wife. Too late.
Why?
It's a little too late. There are people for whom it's a necessity. They're so much more comfortable in marriage than they are outside it, that they really need it to be human. It's just the way they're put together.
Your partnership with Nancy, your second wife.
Yeah, so it was a 52-year-old marriage.
Yeah.
It's a long marriage.
It is.
And she got to live it all the way to 86, which is a long life. Now, there are some tough stretches, but most lives have some tough stretches. And hers came very near the end.
I mean, Charlie, people probably look at you and think you're incredibly wealthy. You've had all these great opportunities and things that have happened in your life, but you've struggled too.
Of course, everybody struggles. The iron rule of life is everybody struggles.
I try and think back of what the toughest moments might have been and how you got through some of those. And I mean,
well, we all know how to get through them. The great philosophers of realism are also the great philosophers of what I call soldiering through. If you soldier through, you can get through almost anything. And it's your only option. You can't bring back the dead, you can't cure the dying child, you can't do all kinds of things. You have to soldier through, and you just, somehow you soldier through. If you have to walk through the streets crying for a few hours a day, as part of soldiering through, go ahead and cry away, but you can't quit. You can cry all right, but you can't quit.
you've had time in your life when you've done that?
Sure. I cried all the time when my first child died, but I knew I couldn't change the fate. In those days, the fatality with childhood leukemia was 100%.
That was your son.
That's gone away now. Now the cure rate is way up in the 90s, and it's an amazing development. Think of how much pleasure it's given me to watch the cure rate for leukemia. What mankind civilization did was soldier through those tough years that took away my cousin Tommy from meningitis, and took away my son Teddy from leukemia. Imagine pretty well fixing that disease for families who came into life later. It's a huge achievement. You can see why I like civilization. To me, civilization is what man has done with the last 2 centuries, and it's been a good thing to watch.
Charlie, Warren Buffett told me that a long, long time ago. You told him he should live his life. He should write his obituary the way he wants it written and then live his life accordingly.
Yeah, sure.
I assume you've done the same thing for yourself.
Well, No, I've written my obituary the way I've lived my life, and if people want to pay attention to it, it's all right with me. And if they want to ignore it, that's okay with me too. I'll be dead, but what difference will it make? It's not a bad idea. Listen, Warren and I both live in the same house for decade after decade after decade. And all our friends get rich and build better, bigger and better houses. And naturally, we both considered bigger and better houses. And I had a huge number of children, so it was justifiable even. And I still decided not to live a life where I looked like the Duke of Westchester or something. I did it on purpose.
Why?
I didn't think it would be good for the children.
That it would spoil them?
Yeah, it's, if you're in a rich family, you think your duty is to use the wealth to live grandly. That's what everybody's doing with the money. You will learn from the people that are doing it.
Is the plan for your life, the obituary you would write in your 30s, the same you would write today?
Sure. I basically believe in the soldier-on system. Mm-hmm. Lots of hardship will come, and you gotta handle it well by soldiering through. And a few rare opportunities will come. You gotta learn how to recognize them when they come, and not make too minor a trip to the pie counter when the opportunity is available. And those are simple lessons.